Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got a special extra long 2-hour special for you today. 2 hours of the best of Dogman 2020. We've got the scariest of the scariest, plus we have an all-new story to start off with that nobody on the planet has ever heard before. But first, I have the exciting honor of announcing that today's executive producer is Braden Russell. Braden Russell packs some muscle. He is not afraid to tussle. Some folks call him Braden Hustle. And for dinner, he has Brussels sprouts. That's because he's Braden Russell and he's got blood corpuscles. If you would like to pack some muscle like Braden Russell with the blood corpuscles, all you have to do is join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click the join link under this and all our videos on YouTube. Then you get access to over 9 hours of scary uncensored Dogman stories far too wild for this channel. And if we like you, we'll make you an executive producer too, but only if you're nice to us. Speaking of someone who is nice to others, I've had requests to show Frank the Black Cat on the show more often. So even though this first story has nothing at all to do with black cats, we'll show you lots of Frankie throughout to entertain your eyeballs. Cute images aside, you better brace yourself for a creepy story. We have one coming up now about a dogman that was not very nice to this particular camper. I don't want to give away too much of what happens though, so I'll just jump straight into this all-new story, which we call The Miller's Creek Monster, or Dogman in Alabama. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't think I've ever heard you tell a story from Alabama where I live. We have Dogman here too, although sometimes I wonder if anybody knows that. If you look on a map, you'll see that we're only 209 away from New Orleans, and New Orleans is famous for sightings of what they call the Lougarou or Rougarou. That's a dogman, if you ask me. I mean, I haven't seen the Lougarou myself, and so I can't say for certain, but it sounds like a dogman to me from the descriptions. Some people are convinced that it's a werewolf down there, a shapeshifter or sorcerer or something like that. Well, whatever it is, it looks like a dogman. And here, about 144 miles to the east, we sometimes see things that look just like the Lougarou. We have a history of seeing these things. There's a video on YouTube from 2014 with a guy from Alabama in it telling a story of how he hunted one of them down one time. You can still find the video if you search for it. It comes up on top for me in DuckDuckGo when I type in Alabama Dogman. Back in 2018, The Overtake, an online magazine, did a whole big piece about the werewolf hunters of Alabama. There are a number of organizations hunting the creature here, as in more than one. It's very well known here locally that Dogman is a thing, and yet I hardly ever see people from outside of the area talking about this. And so I am writing you to begin to correct this issue because I saw a real-life Alabama Dogman, and I'm going to be so nice to you as to allow you to read my account of it. You can thank me later. So there's a creek called Miller's Creek that I like to fish at. I'll usually bring a tent with me and make a weekend out of it. Once this quarantine thing started, I found myself going out there more and more just to get away from my family, and also so I didn't have to wear a stupid mask. I usually can catch enough fish to sustain myself in 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day, but when it gets a little tight, I sometimes set my alarm to get up at midnight and get fishing again by 1 a.m. I found that between 1 and 3 a.m. is a great time to find the fish biting on Miller's Creek. I don't think they know that humans are able to be awake at that time, and they seem more trusting or something, snagging onto my bait a lot more easily than normal. So on this one night a week or two ago, I got up and I forced myself to get out of my sleeping bag and drink some old cold coffee from the day before. Then I stumbled and staggered over to set myself up to fish. Some nights it feels like I'm in the perfect place at the perfect time when I'm out there fishing, and other nights being up at 1 a.m. and fishing by a river in the dark feels completely wrong. A creek that seems peaceful and perfect during the day can sometimes feel as dangerous as the worst urban neighborhood at night. For some reason on this night, Miller's Creek felt scary, like a bad neighborhood. I felt exposed out of my tent, and I wondered if eyes were out in the darkness looking at me. I was tempted to go back to sleep, but I knew that I was eating more fish than I was catching lately, and that I had to make up the time by catching some in the overnights. I mean, it was either that, or make a store run for food, which would require having to wear a dumb mask. I could also go home, which was even worse than going to the store. So, even though I really didn't want to, I struggled to wake up and go fish at Miller's Creek at 1 a.m. It was peaceful at first, but I wasn't feeling any of it. I was cold, so I got my sleeping bag and opened it to wrap it around me like a blanket. I doubt it was actually as cold out as I felt, and I was tempted to start up a campfire again. I figured I was too tired to be starting a fire anyway, so I just shivered and I fished. I kept hearing howling off in the distance. I tried to pretend that I wasn't hearing it. Howling is like thunder. It's not really threatening unless it's coming over close by. These howls were off in the distance and seemed to be coming from the other side of the creek. I told myself that meant it didn't matter, but it kept bothering me anyhow. At some point, the howling seemed to stop, and I started to finally relax. The fishing was completely dead, and I was thinking about giving up and trying again about 6:30 or 7 a.m. I finally bite at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. for some reason. As I was considering climbing back inside my tent, my eyes caught some movement on the other side of the creek. When I looked over there, I saw something that I was not expecting to see. It seemed like a small hill moving by itself. That was my first impression. I immediately noticed that it was too large to be a bear, whatever it was, and I froze into place, staring. It was a big, lumbering beast, darkly colored, and my mind was racing to find a name to apply to it. The first part of it that I saw, which did not look dark, were the extra long wolverine claws that I saw at the ends of its massive paws. They looked like bear claws, but longer. That's why I have to compare them with Wolverine from the X-Men. I thought I might be looking at the ghost of an extinct ground sloth. It was walking upright, or lumbering as I said, and it was bipedal like a man, but not humanoid in any other way. He was walking along the creek, maybe searching for game, and he didn't seem to have noticed me at all. And then he did. Turning to stare at me quickly, I saw the huge mountain of flesh and fur had a head, unlike any bear or any extinct ground sloth that I've seen. This creature had the head of some kind of a giant dog, and now he was staring at me and emitting a low, growling sound. I saw the creature walking toward the shore of the creek, and I got up to run back to my tent. Tripping over my own sleeping bag, I fell down, then set to work untangling my legs as quickly as I could. I heard a splash, in the water and thought that the dogman had kicked a rock into the creek or something. Looking over and unable to locate that dogman, I then realized he had thrown himself in the water, and he was wading and swimming across to my side. I stumbled and staggered and tripped back into my tent, zipping it up and then proceeding to panic. I remember sitting as far from the edges of the tent as I could, because I was visualizing those long claws tearing the entire thing to shreds at any moment. I don't know why I felt like I was safer if the claws missed me the first time, as they would surely get me the second. But I was living in the moment, and I would get to that problem when I got to that problem. It was only seconds before I heard the thumping steps of the dogman outside my tent. I could hear him racing around, running circles around the tent. I could hear him sniffing loudly at it and occasionally barking in an alarmed manner at whatever he was smelling. So far, he seemed as scared as I was, but that was not calming me down. A frightened animal can be a desperate animal. I decided to continue sitting there and meditate on peace. I had read you can bring inner peace into the craziest situation by doing just that, and I figured I had nothing to lose, so I sat cross-legged with my eyes shut, listening as the largest land animal besides an elephant that I'd ever seen tried frantically to figure out what a tent was and how to open it. I tried to be one with the moment, but I found that drove me crazy with panic, so I tried to block out the moment and found that worked slightly better. I kept telling myself that there was still a small chance that I might not get torn to ribbons along with my tent, but I also settled into a kind of acceptance that the end might be near. The dog sniffing and snuffing was so loud and violent that I couldn't just hear it. I eventually started to feel as though I were smelling the great dog beast's breath. Unable to distract my mind any longer, I started to think about the immense monster outside. I wondered how much it ate, and how often it ate. Did it catch something every day? Or did it bring down big prey and eat once a week, scavenging the rest of the time? The reason this was becoming so interesting for me to consider was that a beast that large must need to eat a lot, and to eat a lot in nature means spending a lot of your time catching your next meal. I wondered how much leisure time a creature like this would have. I was wondering this because I was trying to figure out if he was playing with me or if he was hunting me. You might think that with a creature that large there's very little difference, as both could prove deadly for me. That's very true, but there is a difference no matter how slight. If he was playing with me, then he would leave when his stomach reminded him that he was hungry. If he was hunting me, though, then he might not leave until he had plucked the edible nut out of this tent-shaped peanut shell. I spent hours expecting the next second of my life to be my last. I truly expected to see those Wolverine claws turn my tent and me into ribbons. I really didn't expect to see the sunrise ever again. The dogman seemed to lose interest as the sun came up. I still don't know if that meant that I was a game to him or intended as breakfast. I was exhausted and shaken up, but I made some food for myself and I got set up to fish again. The dogman wasn't going to come back while the sun was up. Well, at least I didn't think so. And I had to get caught up on my fishing. That morning, I was completely out of it, but I had more luck fishing than I had been having. After filling my belly, I started to think of how grateful I was to be alive. When you think you're a goner, and then you're fine, it can really change your perspective on life. All of a sudden, my family didn't seem all that terrible. I couldn't wait to go home and give them all big hugs and tell them about what had just happened to me. I packed up after lunch, and I headed on home, feeling tired, but on top of the world. Once I got there, nobody let me speak. Everyone had a complaint or an issue or something to blame on me. I tried to share my deep feeling of spirituality and gratitude with them, but found that instead, they were succeeding in dragging me down to their lower vibration. They seemed to delight in saying things that would make me want to say something just as terrible back to them. I had to bite my tongue repeatedly. Then I gave up. I grabbed my wife's Smith & Wesson for protection in case the Dogman came back, and I drove on out to Miller's Creek. Sometimes, revelations about how much you love your family are better to keep to yourself, as you, shun those you love for the sake of your sanity. I haven't seen the Dogman again yet, and I kinda hope I never do, that maybe he was just migrating through the area. But if he comes back, at least I think I'll be prepared for him this time, and that's a lot more than I've ever been able to say about my family. Dogman is frightening. In fact, that was the single most terrifying thing I ever laid eyes on. I shook all over for hours on end. There's nothing scarier than Dogman in all of nature. But he can't compete for scariness with my in-laws in Mobile, Alabama. And that's why I'm living in a tent by Miller's Creek with the Miller's Creek Monster Dogman at the gate. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a Florida Dogman story for you. I don't know if you get many of them. I live in what we have jokingly referred to as a gated community. It used to be a very large, stately home, but now it's separated into apartments in several buildings, and we're all behind the lovely original iron gate that's still in very good condition. I don't want to say where in Florida we are, because my landlord is litigious, and he would likely think this story was damaging to his business. I don't mean it that way, though. I just mean it as a story that happened to me. In fact, this happened just last week. I was outside, walking back to my building my apartment is in, after having visited my neighbor in one of the other small bungalows there behind the gate. It was dark out, and as I passed the front gate, I made out two somewhat tall silhouettes standing there. I was startled because people either come in with their keys or stand further back by the intercom. There usually isn't a reason to stand right at the gate staring in. It was unnerving, even before I turned to see that they were both very tall dogs standing on their hind legs. My knees almost buckled and I felt a bit nauseous. The dogs started barking at me so loudly and angrily that I began to wonder if the strength of the Dogman is really as legendary as people say. I wondered if they could somehow push the gate open. It was then, as the dogs were barking in such an animated manner, that I noticed. They were both leaning on the gate. That was how they were standing up, by holding onto the gate, not because they were bipedal. I began to laugh at myself. These are just dogs. They're not dogmen. I started talking to the dogs as though they were pets, baby talk. They got so annoyed at that. I saw their spittle flying in all directions, and they seemed to be trying to climb right through that fence itself. I never saw canines so absolutely freaked out before in my life. It didn't matter if these were dogmen or not. If they were that angry, they could tear me apart just the same. I ran inside like a little scared weasel, and I locked my door behind me, shivering. One of the windows in my apartment gives a good view of the front gate. I didn't hear the dogs barking anymore, so I was curious if they'd gone. When I looked out of that window, though, both dogs saw me at once and flipped out all over again. I ducked down and then tried to watch them by standing further back from the window in the shadows. They didn't seem to be able to see me from back there. They kept staring at the window, waiting for me to reappear. They grew restless quickly and began looking around and whining impatiently. I was thinking about going and calling animal control, but I'm glad I waited a little bit longer before I did, because what I saw next was sort of the punchline to the entire story. When the two dogs had gotten bored enough, they both sort of eyed each other, then let go of the fence and slowly strolled away. But they never went down on all fours. They strolled away on their hind legs. I felt like running outside and going after them to see more, but then I remembered how frightening they were. I kicked myself for not videotaping from my phone, but I was thinking they were only dogs. And the way they walked away was really like two suburban guys hanging out and walking around. It really looked like two people. I don't mean physically. Physically, they were two large house pet kind of dogs. But the way they walked, you expected one of them to pull out a Marlboro or use his cell phone or something. The posture and movement, it was just as though you and I were there walking away from the front gate. I ended up going to my phone, forgetting what I was going to do, running back to the window, going back to my phone, getting it, forgetting who I was going to call, and back and forth like that for a while, with my jaw hanging slack. I won't say I was in a state of shock, but I was at least in a state of stunned. I never called animal control because I'm afraid of being branded a Looney Tune. I did tell my neighbors about the two dogs and how frighteningly savage their behavior was. I didn't tell them about how they walked bipedally. I just wanted them to be on guard, because although those dogs may have moved on by now, they also could come back at any second. It's only been a week or so since my sighting, but at least so far, we've had no more visits from the two Dogman at the gate. I thought that one was pretty good when I read it. The way he thought they were people, then thought they were dogmen, then thought they were house pets, then found out what they really were. I thought that was kind of cool. I certainly hope those dogmen find another gate to lean on. For the sake of our narrator, I promise we'll reveal today's executive producer after this next story. This one takes place in a town called Orlando, but it doesn't take place in Florida. This allegedly happened in West Virginia, which is probably better known for its Mothman sightings than werewolf or dogman run-ins. And the name of this one is The Dogman of Clover Fork. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a story about seeing the Dogman in Orlando, West Virginia. I don't actually live there, but I was out hiking with my friend Lori, and we ended up in that area walking around the Oil Creek and then the Clover Fork, which connects to it. The creek is mostly surrounded by woods on either side, so it can be fun to walk and climb around there. I like being around running water in nature for whatever reason. It just recharges my batteries. My friends all say I talk too much, but when I'm hiking over there, I tend to be very quiet and just enjoy the experience without any words attached to it. I feel like the brook is babbling enough for both of us, I suppose. So, we were right near where the two waterways meet up or split off, depending on how you look at it, when Lori told me to be quiet. I thought she saw cops or something. This was a couple of weeks back, and I was afraid we were going to get in trouble for hanging out together with no face masks or something. I really wasn't sure what the legality of any of that was at the time. I had kind of been living under a rock. When I turned to see where she was pointing, however, I wished it was the law. We had a much bigger problem right at that moment. I saw what looked like a dog head mixed with the head of a wild pig or boar, and it seemed almost mounted on this hairy naked guy's shoulders. I mean, it was a hairy man with an animal head. Lori whispered the word Dogman to me, so let's call him that. It sounds better than Pigman. But this was a very bristly furred and pig-snouted kind of a dogman. At the sound of Lori's whisper, the creature man turned in our direction and started barking at us loudly. So she was right. It was a dog after all. And when it barked, you could see the very canine and carnivorous set of teeth it had. That may have been a pig-like nose, but I was wrong about my first impression that it was a pig-like snout. That was a dog, just one that was very boar-like, and also very humanoid. Personally, I found it as off-putting, as I found it frightening. It clearly hadn't seen us yet, but it had heard Lori say its name. I hoped that if we stayed perfectly still, it wouldn't come over to look for us. Lori seemed to have the same idea, and we both held our breath and tried not to move, as that dogman kept looking in our direction. I prayed for something else to make a noise in any other direction, but the forest seemed even quieter than usual. All I could hear was the water rushing and my heart pumping. It felt like the dog thing was going to stand there staring forever. I began shaking all over as it became harder and harder to remain still. And then the creature took a step toward us. Lori got frightened and went to run, but I grabbed her to make her stay. Both of our actions had been enough to alert the dog thing to our presence, and now the point was moot. We had no choice but to run. I remember feeling turned around as we ran, not really remembering what part of the creek we were facing toward or away from. Not that it mattered much in the moment, but I was hoping we might run towards something that would make the dogman less likely to follow. What I mean is something noisy, or maybe a group of people. It didn't matter anyway, because I think gatherings of people were still under ban at that point, although don't quote me on that. The creature was coming after us at about the same pace we seemed to be going initially. This was not one of the super fast 40-mile-an-hour kinds of dogman. This was a pig-nose, bristle-fur dogman. We came to a clearing, and Lori started screaming for help. I was glad she did it because it was all my lungs could do to breathe while running for that long a time. Once again, it didn't matter anyway, because there was nobody around over there. We came across the railroad tracks, and I realized we were by the church. It looked closed, though, and Lori took off across the tracks toward the post office. I looked behind us and didn't see the dogman anywhere. He seemed to be staying in the woods, so I stopped running and took my time walking to the post office, trying to regroup. Post office wasn't open. It was too late or too early or something, I forget. Lori was still panicked, but I was too busy trying to catch my breath to panic all that much. The only choices she had left were to run off by herself or give me a couple minutes to regroup, so she waited impatiently. I think her main problem was that we were still within sight of that forest, and there was nobody around but the two of us. The more I caught my breath, the more I realized she was making a good point. We were not really out of danger, and we had a bit of walking to do before we were at either my home or hers. In either case, the first half of our walk home would have to be within eyesight of the woods around the creeks or through parts of them. I tell you, the walk home for me was every bit as terrifying as the actual experience of being there with the dogman or being chased by him. I kept expecting that thing to jump out on us. I was scared to walk too close to any large object for the entire trip home. Paranoid that a monster was hiding behind it. But in reality, outside of my imagination, the walk home was uneventful. I have a cousin who's really into dogman, and he said it was possible that the creature could have caught up to us if it wanted to. But maybe it didn't want the trouble of taking down two creatures almost as tall as he was. Maybe we were too much for him to eat, so he just chased us off his turf. The idea of what my cousin was saying makes the story even more frightening to me. When I think that it's possible that dogman might have come running out of the woods across those train tracks at us going 40 miles an hour, I would have been a dead duck. Lori probably would have gotten away, but I would have ended up a meal. The idea that that could possibly have happened kind of puts me off the idea of hiking through the trees over in that neck of the woods. at least for now. Do they have VR, virtual reality hiking experiences? What do those cost anyway? Whatever it is, it's not going to cost your life, which is what you might have to pay if you encounter the Dogman of Clover Fork. And now, the moment is here. Today's episode is executive produced by none other than Helen Ivanoff. I thought she was a member of our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com, but I see she's clicked the join link under our videos and joined there. In either case, I hope she is enjoying the over 9 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories too crazy for this channel. But you only need to join one or the other because you get the same episodes either one you join. Thank you, Helen Ivanov, since you are from heaven above. On you they'll never lay a glove. Your contributions are beloved. Thank you, Helen. We couldn't do it without you. And now, for our final story of this episode, it's another one that takes place near moving water. In fact, you could say it happens in moving water. And the name of this allegedly true sighting is the South Santiam River Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a West Coast Dogman story for you if you'd like it. This happened in Oregon, about a 2-hour drive from Portland, out in a wooded area where one of the oldest wagon roads is now a trail it's great to hike. I grew up not far from there, so I've always been interested in the history and lore of the place. I've never heard anything before about the road being associated with the Dogman. It was one of the roads used in America's first transcontinental automobile race, which is amazing to me. It's really a walking trail, not something to drive over. Whenever I walk there, I think about all the history of all the people who've gone down this road before me. At any rate, my brother and I wanted to walk the trail a while back, but when we got there, the little bridge over the South Santiam River was blocked off. I'm sure there was some good reason, but we were both very disappointed. Before beginning the long walk back home, we took a break and hung out, leaning on the front of the bridge and looking out at the water below and the trees and the trail beyond. Even if we weren't going to get to walk the trail, it was making us feel a little better to at least get to be near it, to smell its nature, to watch the leaves of its trees blowing in the wind. Then, my brother saw something that reminded both of us that nature is not always peaceful and soothing. He nudged me and gestured silently down toward the river. I probably did a double take like out of an old black and white comedy movie when I saw what he was pointing at. Down there, at the edge of the river, there was the biggest dog I've ever seen. Like bigger than a bear. And it was drinking water from the river, which flows pretty fast over there. I was ready to flop down and die. That's how absolutely surprised I was. I turned to say something to my brother, but he looked really stern, and he signaled for me to be quiet. I didn't understand what he was so afraid of. He gestured for us to walk away quietly, and he started doing just exactly that. I thought he was crazy. I wanted to get a picture of the giant dog down there, and I'd gotten my phone out already. When I turned back to the scene below me, the dog had just finished drinking, and it did the most unexpected thing. Well, it was unexpected to me, but I bet it's the most expected thing for you viewers of Dogman stories. That big dog pushed itself straight up into the air. Suddenly, he was standing there like a human being. Or, well, he was standing there like a Dogman. The thing had seemed oversized before, but now it felt so tall that it could almost touch the bottom of the bridge. I accidentally gasped or something, and that Dogman saw me immediately. He started barking, this deep, growling kind of bark that I'd never heard before, and my manhood shrunk up practically inside of me. I ran to catch up to my brother, watching behind me the entire time to make sure that giant Dogman wasn't running up after us. This thing was very wolf-like, but I never thought I was seeing a wolf. Something about the coloring, which was black and white, mostly black legs and back but white undersides. The ears were wolf-like, I guess, or like a German shepherd. The face was entirely black. I could only make out the eyes because the blackness looked liquid over there. They did not emit eye shine, but then again, this was during the afternoon, not at night. I don't recall too much about the front paws or claws, as I was watching the teeth and the barking mouth and realizing I'd better run. I do remember that it looked like a dog went down on all fours, but looked very natural up on its hind legs as well. It almost seemed transformed in some ways, but I don't remember details. It's just that it seemed so natural upright, even though I think its arms seemed to bend differently when it was. The legs, too. It was almost like it was more than just the dog standing up. It was kind of like a Transformers transformation, but a lot more subtle. I can't explain it, since it's mostly a subconscious feeling I got from witnessing what I saw. I never took a picture. I never even got as far as opening my camera app before the barking scared me off. My brother claims he knew at once that it was a dogman, even when it was down on all fours. I doubt him. I don't see how he could have known. However, he did tell me to be quiet, so maybe he really did know. I feel as though I was blessed to see that dogman standing up. It was an unforgettable, once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I also feel as though I was twice as blessed to be able to get away unharmed from the South Santiam River Dogman. I hope you're all well and haven't had your businesses or homes destroyed recently. My neighborhood is covered in ugly graffiti, but south of us got smashed and burned, so you gotta count your blessings. I'm looking out the window as the owners of the 7-Eleven are sweeping up the glass from the bricks thrown through their windows last night. But you didn't come here for talk of those kinds of scary things. In fact, I'd like to offer you safe haven from that kind of horror for the next 20 minutes or so. We have a collection of short dogman encounters that were sent in to us today. You might say they're kind of like popcorn dogman stories in that sense. Tasty, but you can't eat just one. One of the main reasons we're even getting to do this show today at all is our newest executive producer, Timothy Ferguson. Timothy Ferguson, Mr. Tim, stays slim and trim because he goes to the gym. We thank you, Mr. Tim Othy, with enthusiasm. That's quite frothy. Well, it kind of rhymed. If you'd like to be a Scary Stories executive producer like Timothy Ferguson and get access to over 9 hours of secret, uncensored, scary stories far too wild to tell on this channel, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click the join link under this video. And now, on to our first allegedly true story. This was sent in to us anonymously from a state in the Northeast. It's about a sighting that this guy's elderly aunt made, so he wants to keep it anonymous. Her sightings of the creature were just curiosities, until the day when she exclaimed, "The dog-headed badger man walked into my yard." Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about my Aunt Esther and her personal dogman that none of the rest of us have seen yet. She told us about him for years, but we never took her seriously until very recently. When the recent lockdown situation happened, we tried to talk Aunt Esther into coming to stay with us. Instead, she talked us into going to stay with her. She had more bedrooms than we do, so she won. When she started telling us that the dog-headed badger man was back, we humored her and didn't make a big deal about it. I was kind of thinking she was kidding us about the monster man, and my wife just thought Aunt Esther was getting older. The stories were usually the same. She would see it walking through the woods, Sometimes she would see it stalking small game. It was a man, I guess, about 6 feet or maybe a few inches taller than that. And he was apparently a furry who wore a dog costume. Or else it was a dog that hopped around on its hind legs. I never really paid close enough attention to her retellings. The one thing that made it not a man and not a dog, though, to Aunt Esther, was that she claimed the creature had badger-like claws. Now, if you look at a badger, its claws are somewhat similar to a bear's, so we wondered if that might have been what she saw in the woods. I'm not a nature person, so I had no plans of going into those woods even before I heard that there might be bear in there. All of this changed when Aunt Esther woke the entire family up screaming bloody murder the other night. We found her downstairs in the kitchen, staring out the window. She was screaming that the dog-headed badger man was coming. We looked around and saw nothing outside, but she said he was still there. He had been standing in the woods, staring toward the house with his glowing eyes, when she came downstairs to get a late-night snack. When her eyes met the creature's, the dogman emitted a low howl and began charging toward the house on its hind legs. When I asked where it had gone, she said her screaming caused it to hide. My wife and I slept on the floor in Aunt Esther's room that night to guard her, so that she could relax enough to go to sleep. Beginning the next morning, she began an urgent program suggesting we all go stay at our place as we had originally planned. To me, that doesn't seem like a crazy person's reaction to a situation. It seems like a fairly rational response. My family are down with it. We wanted to go home anyhow. We're going to go back tomorrow, assuming Aunt Esther makes it through one more night out here in Dogman country. Oh, excuse me. Not Dogman. It's the dog-headed badger man that walked into my yard. Dogman can cause hysteria. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I met a dogman once when I was with my little brother, and I have a theory since then that the dogman lives on fear, and in a sense, might be fear itself, at least partially. Well, let's say it's an ingredient in what makes the dogman who he is. I say I met him once, but he's around still sometimes, and I always know when he's near, at least if I'm with my brother. The time when I met the big beast was actually the most fun period of my life, and my little brother's too. Our parents had gotten back together and went about a month without any really big fights. They would still disagree, but they would play fair with each other and come to mutually agreed upon solutions to things. It was a little slice of heaven, but it started to end after the dogman came to stay. I say came to stay, but for all I know, he may have always been there. Maybe he just revealed himself at that point. Maybe he sensed that the fragile peace in my family's household was about to shatter, or maybe he helped make that happen. We have a house in the country, or at least it seems like the country to me and my little brother, because we used to live in Baltimore. I guess this is the suburbs, but there are a lot of aspects of it that feel like the country to me and little bro. Plus, we just like the idea of the country more than the idea of the suburbs. We have a natural area near here that we never visit anymore. Like I sort of hinted at before, the nature area comes to us now. But that first time, me and my little bro went for a walk. The entrance to the place is just down a dirt road behind our house. It's really close by, and we had felt at home there since we moved in. Not anymore though, because that's the place where we met the dogman. We had been walking for a while and we were tired. We sat down on a rock to rest, and then that dogman just stood up as though we were on a nightmare version of a kid's show. He popped up out of the woods. We could see him down to where a navel would be on a human. It was like a werewolf, but the eyes were animalistic and reflected eye shine back to us To our naked eyes, the snout and head shape were not human and could not have been a mask because although the face was longer than a man's, the jaw was up higher than it would have been on one of us. This was a shaggy, wolf-like, dark gray or maybe black, upright walking dog man with arms like those of a Bigfoot, but with long, sharp claws on the hands. As you can tell, I meant what I said when I said it was Dogman. The creature popped up like something out of a spook house show at a carnival, you know? Like it said boo, but it really let out this nasty growl. I screamed, a really high-pitched scream, and my little brother, he started laughing. I'm not kidding. He started laughing like he was the Joker. I'm not sure which Joker, maybe Mark Hamill, because he laughed and laughed and laughed, and he just didn't stop. The dog man seemed to be staring at us, and I tried to tell my little brother to quit it, but he just wouldn't. And I started guiding him slowly backward, away from the dog man, who just stood there watching us. Little bro calmed down for a while after we got home, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to him laughing in his bed. I saw the shadow of a man at the window, and I took my slipper and threw it. When it banged off the glass, I saw the shadow of the figure running away. It was not a man. It was that dog man. He had followed us home. I felt a knot in my stomach because this kind of ruins a lot about what had up to then been fun about living in the country or the edge of the suburbs or whatever. I mean, having a man-eating, supposedly mythical predatorial cryptid stalking you and your brother and causing him to erupt into uncontrollable laughter as a nervous reaction each time he comes around, that's not a good selling point for where we live. By now, the dogman is habituated, and I know when it's around because my younger brother starts laughing like he's a crazy person. It often starts sort of normally. Sometimes I'll think he's laughing at something on television or something I said, but then it continues far too long. I don't know if he smells the creature or senses it telepathically or what, but whenever he starts laughing, it's sure to lead to something bad happening that night. If we don't see the creature, we'll hear it. If we don't hear it, we'll find something lost or broken or gone by the next morning. The dogman doesn't come around all the time. He leaves us alone just enough that we can almost start to pretend we aren't living inside a nightmare. And then my brother will start laughing, and we'll know that the nightmare has returned. Dogman can create fear. Dogman can create anxiety. Dogman is bad for your health. And as I learned from personal experience, Dogman can cause hysteria. Dogman is real, not science fiction. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I saw Dogman once back in the 1990s in Michigan. It was crossing the road as I drove at night, and I could clearly see that it was not a bear, but it was walking upright, and it was furry. Its head was canine, and its eyes reflected my headlights brightly, which a human's eyes can't do. That's how I know it couldn't have been a man in a costume. But there's another thing I know as well. It wasn't something from a fantasy story that came out of a magical vortex. It was a real, living, walking, breathing animal taking up space in our three-dimensional reality. In short, it was physical. If I had gotten out of my car and touched it, I would have felt something. And it was a predatory, meat-eating animal. So after I touched it, or perhaps even before, it likely would have had me for a midnight snack. I appreciate you running all these Dogman stories, but I don't see why so many of them have to get so fantastic. If those people really feel so strongly that the Dogman came from another reality, why do their stories always seem to have the least amount of proof? Obviously, I could be accused of the same thing since I have no photos or evidence of any kind that I saw the Dogman. But I know what I saw, and nobody can tell me that I didn't, especially if you believe in vortexes on the side of a highway. I have nothing against people who believe in vortexes. I even speed dated a girl who believed in that stuff once, but Dogman does not come from inside one. That doesn't even make any sense. I wish I had stopped and checked the area that I saw the Dogman walk to see if I could find tracks. Then again, maybe it's better that I didn't. If the creature had come back for me, then I wouldn't be here today to communicate this very important message to all of you. The Dogman is not science fiction. It is science fact. It lives and breathes and howls and growls and takes and eats just like any other mammalian land predator. If you go around carelessly in the forests of North America, and sometimes elsewhere as well, you may find yourself the victim of this very real and very deadly dog-headed bear-like monster. I hope my opinions have not offended anyone. My mother did not raise me to hate, but I feel that treating the Dogman as a character from Star Trek could cost lives in the long run. May you all have a blessed day. Why Dogman appears in or before storms. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have heard repeated stories on your channel and several others about Dogman appearing in or before storms of various sorts. I have also been fascinated with David Polite's work, in which he says that mysterious disappearances of people are often followed up by terrible rain or snowstorms, which make hunting for the lost person harder or even impossible. I think I accidentally happened upon an answer for this because of something I witnessed. I don't think I'm the first person to suggest something like this, but I might be the first to do so based on my own personal experiences. I spent a week in the forest near my home 2 weeks ago. I was camping out, but I was also 10 minutes walking from my house, and at points I could see my house in the distance, so I was only sort of pretending to rough it. I would drop over at my home every day just to see if everything was okay, but other than that, I was in my tent or hiking around. This was my version of sheltering at home. I think I ran into 2 people the entire time. I might still be out there, except for what happened to me on my last night there. I was inside my tent when I heard a strange, machine kind of sound. It was a hum, but also a vibration. It would increase and decrease, and it sounded like nothing in nature. So I figured it had to be some kind of a machine. I racked my brain for what kind of a machine would make a noise like that, but it made me frightened, because it sounded like something from a horror movie. I wanted to go look outside my tent, but I was scared. What if it was something used by bad people, for bad reasons? What if I was in danger? I poked my head out, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Climbing completely out of my tent, I looked at the forest, and it looked the same as before I'd gone in. But some of the trees were wiggling in a way that seemed out of the ordinary. It was like a mouth was opening in the reality of the trees. I felt wind coming from behind me, cold, pulling me toward those trees, and at the same time, I felt the hot breath of the reality mouth blowing on me, pushing me back. I saw blades of grass and pebbles and small things here and there being sucked up toward the reality mouth, and I felt small wet things flying out and splattering on and around me. I ran home, and even before I got there, the skies opened up, and we had ourselves quite a rainstorm. I locked all my doors and windows as though I had been followed home. Then I took a long hot shower, feeling like I had been dirtied by whatever that reality orifice had spit out on me. I was going to sleep later on in my own bed when the idea hit me. That was a reality yawn. When you yawn, you expel what you don't need and intake what you do. You both breathe in and out in a big way. I think the universes or the multiverse may do a similar thing, and that may explain why Dogman brings storms and why disappearances of humans do too. Maybe Dogman is coming through these vortexes or portals, coming through these reality yawns. And maybe when people disappear, that's where they're going. But in either case, the cosmic yawn itself is what causes weather systems to go haywire. I did hear howling that night, but it might have been a neighbor's dog. I had all my shades pulled down because I had seen enough inexplicable stuff for one night, for one lifetime. And that, I think, may explain why Dogman appears in or before storms. Is it lucky to step in Dogman poo? Dear Scary Stories NYC, yo, is it good luck or bad to step in Dogman do? Because I think that's what I did last night. There was a Dogman in the trees next to our backyard, and then it left. I went into the forest after it with my dog on a leash and my flashlight, but when I reached the edge of the trees, I stepped into a large, hot, recent pile of you-know-what. If that Dogman hadn't left it, then some other large animal must have just been there. I'm not saying that's impossible, but I didn't see it, and my dog didn't start barking until the Dogman was there. Ever since then, everything's been weird. It feels like my luck has changed drastically, but I can't tell yet if it's good or bad. That's why I'm writing to ask you and your viewers. They say it's lucky to step in what a dog leaves behind. Is it the same with a Dogman? Signed, Smelly Foot in PA. Dear Smelly Foot, yo, it's your cousin Bigfoot. I would say it would be good luck if you can get that poo to a valid researcher like, Jeff Meldrum or somebody, and they could verify that you stepped in what you think you stepped in. Until then, though, I would say the verdict is out. If you guys watching have a better answer than me, please leave it below. We'd love to read your thoughts. And now our final story of the episode. I saw a flying humanoid with a dog head. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was driving on College Avenue past the Shenango Valley Cemetery in Greenville, Pennsylvania 3 nights ago when I saw a flying humanoid or human-like bird flying over the graveyard. I actually pulled my car over, opened my door, and got halfway out looking up over my car roof to try to see it better. It would glide sometimes and flap its wings occasionally, but I was having trouble making out the shape of the wings. They would appear to be leathery bat-like wings, yet I wasn't absolutely sure I wasn't seeing bird wings. It was too dark and they moved around too much. The body was easier to see because it hung there limply, and I couldn't tell if the body was actually in control of the wings or if it was strapped into some kind of flying machine. It looked like a humanoid dog, but one hanging as limp as a relaxed cat. It reminded me of Stephen Hawking, and yet the wings allowed the creature, or whatever I was seeing, to glide gracefully, doing circular maneuvers over the tombs and over the stones. I thought about trying to take a picture, but then suddenly felt an intense boredom and an annoyance at the entire thing. I felt so tired, I just wanted to go home and sleep. This surprised my wife, who had actually made dinner for both of us that night. If you knew my wife, you'd know how rare an event that is, so it was extra weird that I did that. And I slept through the night, too, not even thinking about the strange flying Dogman until the middle of the next day. I meant to write to you about it then, but I kept forgetting what I was about to do, and it would make me feel so tired that I would need to take a nap or go get some coffee. I'm glad I finally got this off my chest. I wonder if you will use it for your show, and if you do, and if I listen, I wonder if I will remember that I was the one who wrote this into you. Imagine you're alone in nature, on your mountain bike, speeding along a trail, not a care in the world. When you get to your favorite part of the trail, you drive up a ramp in the dirt, and for a few moments, you're airborne, flying like the birds in the sky. Then imagine looking to where you had intended to land your bike, and seeing that space has already been marked occupied by the Dogman. But before we get to that, I'm excited to announce that today's episode is executive produced by Camellia Donahue. Camellia rhymes with Sensimili. No, wait, I can't do that. Let me start over. Of all the things I want to do, I want to thank Camellia Donahue. We're back on YouTube, that is true, because of Camellia Donahue. Thank you, CD. We couldn't do it without you. If you'd like to be epic and important like Ms. Donahue, just join our secret paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click the join link under this video. Same thing either way, because you'll get access to over 9 hours of scary Dogman stories and a new secret uncensored Dogman story each week at peterbernard.com. You know, there are a lot of things I've done in my life, but riding a mountain bike is not one of them. Of course, being a Bigfoot, I've come close to being run over by them several times. The situation usually ends up similarly to what allegedly happened to the guy who sent us the email that we based this story on, and we call it Dogman on the motorbike trail. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story that happened to me a few years back that I never told anyone about before because I figured they'd think I was crazy. Since I've been watching your show, I realized that you're crazy too, and so maybe I can tell this story to you. I didn't know what a Dogman was at the time this happened, so as I hope you can imagine if you put yourself in my place, I felt that I had actually lost my mind at the time, and that this was what insanity must be like. I figured, well, now that I'm crazy, I'm gonna see monsters with dog heads. I just have to accept this or else it'll drive me, well, you get my point. So when this happened, I was not at all interested in monsters, and I don't remember if I even knew the word cryptid. I may have, because my younger brother was always into watching Bigfoot and alien shows on TV. I am certain for a fact, though, that I thought werewolves and things that looked like them only existed in fiction. I had never heard a story of anything even close to an upright walking canid being something that legitimately lived, especially not in the USA, and most especially not in the 21st century, and only a 2-hour drive from New York City. I mean, even now that sounds impossible to me. Something like that, if it ever existed, would belong to a long time ago. How could it even survive into modern times? It would need to compete with bear and big cats for the same prey, I would think. Here I am arguing that it couldn't exist, and meanwhile, I almost ran the thing down on the mountain bike path. I forgot to say, I ran into, or almost literally ran into, the Dogman I saw while I was riding pretty fast and wild around a mountain bike trail in Pennsylvania. It's up north near New York State, and it goes all around. It's a really nice trail. For me at that time, it was the perfect level of challenge. I was forced to take some parts slow, but I felt confident enough to charge fast through other parts of it. And at a number of points along the trail, it's just so beautiful that I usually would find myself pulling off the road just to hang out. I'd never done that on a mountain bike trail before. I'd only ever sped through them as fast as my skills would allow. I haven't done anything like this for a few years now, and I never got all that good at it, but I could hold my own and I never got any major injuries. I always got bumps and bruises, mind you, but I was lucky enough never to have broken anything. I had ridden this trail several times, so I knew a couple of spots that I wanted to try faster this time than I had ever done before. There were a couple of areas where I thought if I took it fast enough I could sort of Evel Knievel it over some rough spots. In other words, if I drove fast enough, I might be able to leap my bike over the rough patches. I also might have ended up breaking my head, but I already told you that didn't happen. I want to pause here to say two things. First of all, I had a helmet on and I had some experience with what I was doing. If you do not have experience, you shouldn't be trying to jump things on your mountain bike. The other thing I want to say is that if I did go back to mountain biking, this trail is one I would want to revisit. Just because this traumatic event I'm about to describe happened there doesn't mean I'm afraid to go back. The chances of my seeing this creature were so infinitesimally small that it almost makes me believe things must happen for a reason. I could probably go sleep every night for the rest of my life in that place and never see another Dogman. The sightings of these things are so rare that you can't expect it to even happen once. And it's certainly not likely to happen twice to the same person. So, this is not a disgruntled former employee of that park trying to wreck its business or anything like that. In fact, I would encourage you to safely and wisely get out into nature. It's good for you, at least until it kills you. So, by all means go, but research safety protocol before you do, and make sure you get home in the same condition you were when you arrived. It's a lot more fun that way. Now that my lecture is over, I'm going to come down off my high horse and admit that I'm not smarter than anyone. I was reckless that day, and I was too eager to take this particular curve at a higher speed than I'd ever taken it before. This wasn't just a bit of a jump. I was going to, if I did the maneuver correctly, fly up a natural ramp in the trail, fly a bit in the air as the ground receded beneath me, and literally as soon as I landed, I was going to need to turn hard to the left. I used to love these parts of the ride best because it required my full attention. When you put your complete attention on something, everything else gets sort of blocked out, and it feels like you're truly and fully alive, more than in any other moment. That's why people parachute out of airplanes or bungee jump, to bring themselves to full focus and force themselves to be there in the present moment. This is like that, but you also have to react fast to changes. You're not just falling. You're driving at high speeds. You have the power to move whichever way you like, but one wrong decision, and you may never make another again. At least if you go as fast as I used to in those days. As I came flying through the air, I turned my head to the left so I could see where I was about to make my turn. I'm going to have to slow this next part down a lot, just to make it understandable. The first thing I saw was a pair of eyes staring back at me, and when they saw me, they widened in surprise. The next thing I remember noticing was that the eyes were animal eyes, the way they and the rest of the long-snouted dark brown face reacted. I understood that I was looking at a dog. At the same time that my conscious mind was going through that period of recognition, my side vision and subconscious mind were noticing that this was not in fact a dog, but instead something standing up bipedally. I remember feeling a deep horror as my subconscious matched the basic furry bipedal upright walking body shape with various boogeymen of legend. as well as another large land predator, namely the bear. My subconscious or instinctive reaction was one of horror and fear, both the fear of pain or of possibly losing one's life as well as the fear of the supernatural or unknown. It's like the fear you would have if someone on a lonely street pulled a weapon on you, coupled with the fear you would have if you saw aliens walking through your bedroom wall. Two very different kinds of fear, and the alarms they set off in my nervous system reverberated so strongly that my conscious mind even took notice. Breaking the shocked gaze of the dog, I looked downward to see that those dog eyes were over 8 feet off the ground. I had been judging my situation one way, then saw the dog and assumed I was closer to the ground, then saw that the dog was in fact a giant monster, and that I was higher off the ground than I had thought in the first place. I had readjusted twice already mid-air, and inside, I felt certain that I was about to crash out. Suddenly, and in a way that I didn't make note of at the time, the dogman was no longer in my way. I was about to land on some loose-looking ground at the edge of the trail, and I was hitting it at an unfriendly angle. As the wheels slammed into the dirt, we were so tilted to the side that I messed up the left side of my boot, scraping it at high speeds across the ground. The bike and I managed to right ourselves somehow that I also really can't explain. It was the strangest experience within a strange experience. I remember being certain that I was going to be sliding off the edge of that trail, and then an internal confidence and lightness caused me to be certain that I could do this. I could lift the bike back up. I felt so light, almost as though balloons were attached to my back, and I continued along for the rest of the course without ever even really having slowed down. When I was leaving, I ran into a guy I knew who was just going in, and I warned him there was either some kind of a weird bear in there, or else maybe a crackhead in a werewolf costume. But in either case, he should take care. He laughed and gave me a look like he didn't know whether to believe me or not. I mean, I don't think I looked shaken up at the time. The way it happened, my adrenaline was already pumping. So seeing the dogman didn't change my mood or attitude as much as it would have in almost any other situation. What I mean is, if I were alone and it was dark and suddenly a dogman was there, then that dogman would have a huge impact on my nervous system in that moment and would have my complete attention. But if I'm already in a scary situation where every split-second choice could mean life or death, and then you add in the dogman, he has a much smaller percentage of your attention. That's just the way it is. Later that day, after I got home and I was talking about it on the phone with my then girlfriend, I remember choking up and getting emotional, and she made fun of me. I got angry at myself, not understanding why I would almost cry about seeing a dogman, when at the time I had coped with it and moved on. I was embarrassed at my behavior, and I didn't blame her for kidding me about it. I guess, in retrospect, that the dogman had freaked me out a lot more than I realized at first. That was when I went through that period I was describing to you briefly at the beginning of this story. I wondered if I was insane, and that's why I was seeing the dogman. It was as terrifying to me to think of that as it was to think how close the creature and I had come to ramming into each other. If that dogman had not been there and was only being imagined by me, then how could I know what else was real or imaginary? If I couldn't trust my senses to report to me what was going on around me, how was I ever going to function in the world? How would I know if I really tied my shoelaces? Maybe I might be walking around barefoot while I thought I had boots on. I didn't like the idea of hallucinations seeming that real, and it made me angry. I'm not sure who exactly I was angry at, but let's say I grew indignant with the world for a while. It seemed unfair to me that something like that could even happen. I began to really wish I could prove that dogman existed so that I could know I was sane. But at the same time, I wondered if that were an insane way to think. After a while, I made friends who knew about the Dogman and assured me that I was not insane. After they explained to me that I would probably never see him again, I also relaxed about the situation. I thought that since I had gone insane, I would be seeing monsters all the time from then on. It was a relief to learn that not only would I probably never see another cryptid during my lifetime, but I wasn't even insane to start with. I accept now that this was a real, rare, daytime sighting of the Pennsylvania Dogman. So although I don't even think I saw the creature for even 1 or 2 seconds, I am one of the very few who saw one of these guys in full broad daylight. So I'll try to remember any more things I may have noticed about its appearance. For one thing, it was a dog. It was not a wolf. There were wolf-like things about it, but that was a dog head and not a wolf head. I know they're both canines, but this was kind of a mix of a German Shepherd and maybe a Rottweiler. The chest reminded me more of a pit bull, though. It was all black, and the fur was more like dog fur than wolf fur, at least the wolves I've seen. It looked like your family pet, but on steroids. I might be saying that because I saw it when it was surprised, not when it was threatening to attack. It did not look like a dog doing a trick standing on its hind legs. It looked like a bipedal creature wearing a dog skin more than it looked like a stupid pet trick. Whatever that thing was, it looked like it was used to being upright. I mean, it was upright before I came around the curve, so it wasn't like it was doing it to show off to me or to try to frighten me off by making itself look larger. If it was upright before any other living creatures were in its range of vision, then clearly it must naturally and normally walk upright. It's simple using deductive reasoning. I did not notice its teeth, and I don't remember much about the back legs or the paws. I do remember that it was standing, that it was in my way, that I diverted my eyes briefly to look for a way around the thing, and then I noticed it was no longer there, and used all my remaining time and strength to land me and that bike on that trail and not off of it. I have been asked by a friend of a friend if I am saying that the Dogman disappeared or blinked out of existence or teleported or some such thing, and I really have no answer for that. I am saying it was in my way. I looked for another path around it and then saw I didn't need to do that any longer. Possibly one of those paranormal type things occurred, but it's just as possible that the thing dove out of my way into the bushes. I kind of had other things on my mind at the moment, and so I honestly did not notice. Whatever that Dogman did to get out of my way, though, I thank him, because we both emerged from that situation unscathed. If I sound flippant about my encounter, I apologize. He was a horrible-looking so-and-so, and I would never want to run into anything like him ever again. I'm lucky that the only cryptid sighting I've had so far was in broad daylight and lasted all of 3 seconds max. I'd be glad to never see another creature like that for the rest of my life. I'm not in any way disrespecting those who've had to deal with these things one-on-one. But how can you begrudge me bragging rights? I mean, I'm one of the only people in history who can honestly say that when Dogman saw me coming, he ran. On the day when I almost literally drove into Dogman on the motorbike trail. We've got an episode-length Minnesota Dogman story today that the submitter said is the scariest and most traumatic thing that ever happened to him. Before we get to that, though, we have a very special executive producer for this episode. We're talking about Helena66, or I think I may have called her Helen Berry on our previous show. Helena has been going through some tough times in and out of hospitals, and I told her she's on our executive producers list no matter what, getting all our Secret Uncensored episodes for free. She still sent us an extra large donation to paypal.me/PeterBernard209 anyway. She also sent this note. You have helped me through a lot of hospital stays. I've had 11 surgeries. I have listened to every show of yours. You've been there, and you didn't even know it. I don't feel like she should be sending her money to us. I wish we could be doing something for Helena instead. I can't follow up those lovely words from this sweet lady with one of my silly rhymes. Helena's emails always get me choked up. I don't feel worthy of them. Thank you, Helena. Now we're going to get to the part of the show that Helena likes best, which is the story part. This new story is sort of a sequel in a way to one we had recently that took place in Minnesota. The story submitter himself kind of explains all that, so let's just jump right into the tale that we've called The Minneapolis Monster Returns. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I remember you having a story about a dogman in Minneapolis or somewhere in Minnesota pretty recently. I thought at the time that it was made up, and maybe it was. However, I myself saw a man-sized dogman or werewolf-type creature this past week in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so I'm writing to tell you about the return of the Minneapolis Monster. It happened in an extremely unlikely place, Berry Park, which is north of Lake Harriet and south of Bede-Maka-Ska, the once and future name of Lake Calhoun, near the Thomas Sadler Roberts Bird Sanctuary. I had a lot on my mind that day, and I had gone for a walk in the park. I found myself wandering off the path and into the trees, looking for a place where nobody else was around, so I could think and concentrate for a while. I sat at the base of one of the trees, and instead of thinking, I kind of vegged out for a few minutes. I remember listening to the buzz of the forest around me, and it seemed almost like an orchestra. Each section played a different note or repeating riff, and together they created this bigger tone and pattern. After realizing this, I noticed that it was way darker in those trees than it was outside of them. It had been sunny when I walked inside, but had grown so dark that I wondered if it had become overcast. I looked up, seeing patches of clouds here and there through the thick tree canopy overhead, and that seemed to confirm my suspicions. It must be about to rain, and I probably should start heading home right away if I didn't want to get drenched. I got up and stretched, then took a look around. I have this tendency in forests and woods to head in the exact wrong direction after sitting under a tree. In fact, that's the only part about sitting under a tree that I don't care for, trying to get back to where I came from without getting turned around and lost again. This time, I had the instinct to go one way, so I suspected that I should head in the opposite direction. But then I second-guessed myself, wondering if my idea to go against my instinct was what had gotten me lost those other times in the first place. I remembered that I had promised myself to look for landmarks on my way into the trees the next time I did it, and I cursed myself for forgetting my promise to myself. I tried to visualize how I had approached the tree, then I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, and I tried some more. I was pretty certain I finally remembered, so I took off in the direction I was hoping I had come from. Then I stopped and turned around because it didn't look familiar at all. There was a strange noise above me, as though 100 birds were shaking the tops of the trees. Looking up, I saw that it was starting to rain. No doubt it would take a while to feel it on the ground level, but the rain had already begun. I resumed walking in the direction I had started in, hoping that it would turn out to be the correct way to go. This was one of those situations where everything was all fine, until suddenly it all wasn't. I was marching through the woods with growing confidence that this had been the way I had come in, when suddenly there was a loud noise of branches and leaves being shaken violently in front of me, and I stopped short, eyes wide, not having any idea what I was about to see. In the next few seconds, A man-sized, hairy creature emerged from the brush about 12 or 15 feet away, bringing a horrible odor with him that caused me to instantly begin choking. It was like his smell sucked the oxygen itself out of the air. I felt like I had swallowed needles, and they all got stuck in my esophagus. The creature was over to me in an instant so quickly that I fell over backward in surprise. It was a male, but what species it was, I can't tell you. This was a bipedal and incredibly man-like being, but the legs were oddly shaped, and it had a tail. The creature had oddly shaped hands as well, and his head was very much like that of a dog. I wouldn't say it was exactly like any particular kind of dog or canine that I had ever seen, and maybe it wasn't actually a canine at all. Maybe what I was seeing was a result of parallel evolution. Just as the Tasmanian tiger was neither tiger nor canine, but marsupial, perhaps what I saw was something that developed partially parallel to dogs and partially parallel to human beings. I'm not a scientist, so maybe what I just said was silly, or maybe I'm only partially right, but I do think it's something to consider that I don't hear discussed all that often. I would guess that the top of the manimal's head was maybe 5'10" off the ground. His ears stood up on top, adding maybe another 2 inches to that. He was thin, but not scrawny or unhealthy looking. If he were fully human, he might have been called strapping, as in a strapping young man. I think this was a younger adult male, but again, I'm completely guessing here, and I'm basing it on nothing other than my gut feelings. Speaking of guts, I was imagining mine being shredded all over the forest floor when I saw that hungry look in the dogman's eyes. He looked me over, and he was drooling. I have to say, visualizing him in my memory, that he was definitely a real creature, but at the same time, he was also definitely the size of a normal person. When I tell people the story face to face, they laugh at me and say it was a furry or a cosplayer bored and lonely because there haven't been comic conventions for months. One of my friends told me I was probably being filmed for YouTube or some TV show, but if so, no intern or producer ever got me to sign a release form. I had a dream the other night that I was in those woods, and the dogman was there too. This time, he was calling out to me. He was calling my name. I waited for him, and he came over and he took his mask off, and it turned out he was really a pretty girl in a costume. She apologized for scaring me, and it was such a relief. I felt like the mystery was finally solved. Plus, I got to meet a nice pretty girl. I was so happy and felt such a weight lifted off me. But then I woke up and realized I still had no idea who or what that was out there, scaring the bejesus out of me. 2 things I could be sure of, though. It probably wasn't a pretty girl. And the other thing was, the dogman was not going to apologize for scaring me. So where was I? Oh, right. I was flat out on my butt, staring up at this skinny creature with wolverine claws and dinosaur teeth, barking at me like I was a prowler in his backyard. I sort of skidded back away from him on my side until I could climb up and begin trotting away. At first he barked at me, allowing me to go. I thought that he was going to stay where he was barking, but instead, he started after me, his lips curled back, displaying his prehistoric dentures to inspire me to keep running. I come from a religious family, but I always laughed at the idea of it. In that moment, though, I suddenly remembered prayer after prayer from my childhood, and they ran through my head in succession. I also improvised some new ones, such as praying that the creature was only scaring me away, not chasing me until I tired out. As long as he maintained the same distance behind me, I maintained my same speed jogging away. I didn't know how long this was going to go on, so I knew I'd better pace myself. Another big part of the story for me and how I survived was that each time I felt complete freezing panic, I would say to myself in my head, "It's okay that I'm scared." I know it doesn't sound like it makes sense, does it? But it worked because it separated me from the person who was scared. I could be the one deciding that it was okay to be scared, not the person frozen with fear. And if I wasn't frozen in fear, neither was my body any longer, and I was able to continue at a normal pace. Eventually, more and more of my conscious mind was able to regroup and take over command from my frightened lizard brain. I remembered I had my phone in my back pocket. My thought was not to use it to try to anger the creature by taking a photo of it, but instead to use the phone, get this, as a phone, if you can believe it. I decided to call the cops, quick, before the Democrats disband them. The call didn't work, though. My phone was doing this thing at the time. It was weird. I had to do a factory reset to finally fix it, but I hadn't done that yet when this happened. To make a call or make a text message, I for some reason had to be in Wi-Fi. Texting and phone aren't even supposed to need Wi-Fi. They should work without it. So I tried to call the cops, but the thing came on the screen saying I wasn't in Wi-Fi. I pulled open the Wi-Fi thing while continuing to jog away from the Dogman, and I tried to scan for some free service to use, but I wasn't seeing any, so I just gave up and put the phone back in my pocket to focus on what I was doing. And what I was doing was trying to keep up my pace, neither speeding up nor slowing down, as the Dogman continued to pursue me, making threatening sounds, but never closing the gap between us. I felt like he was toying with me, and I wondered how much of me would even be left for them to find later on. Would David Paulides end up writing about me? And if so, would I be a sentence, a paragraph, or a chapter? These were the dumb thoughts going through my head as I began to give up hope and panic. I remember trying not to look back, to just listen and hear if the Dogman was still behind me or not. If he suddenly rushed me, I would not have the speed to get away, so I really decided I would prefer if he got it over quick. I wouldn't want to see it coming. I was very sad at that moment, and there were a bunch of people I wished I had said goodbye to before I went for my walk on that day. Finally, after not noticing the sounds of the creature for some time, I stopped and I wondered if he were gone. I sniffed the air, and I choked, because it still smelled horrible. I thought that smell might be on me, though. I couldn't really tell. Bracing myself and gathering all my courage, I risked a glance behind me. It felt like my chest got shocked with a taser when I saw it the exact same distance behind me, lurking inside a particularly dark, shadowy area. Yes, you really can see eye shine from a Dogman with your naked eyes if he's in a dark enough area. It's a very chilling experience, and I shuddered violently and uncontrollably as though my body had lost all its temperature at once. Lightning flashed, just like in some old horror movie, and for a second, I saw every hair and wart on that animal man's body. It was unmistakably real. When the sound of the thunder hit, it was so loud and hard that I felt like I'd been smashed on the head with a hammer. I tried to keep walking at the exact same pace, but I had to look at my legs and make sure they were landing where I wanted them to land. It became harder and harder to guide them correctly, and then I began to forget why I was doing this. As I got more and more lightheaded, I felt as though it was also harder and harder just to stand up at all. The rain was cold, and that didn't help me, as I legitimately began to lose body heat. "Hey buddy, are you okay?" Someone was asking me. I looked around, and I was on grass. I wasn't in the forest. I was standing on grass in the rain, next to where West 40th Street meets Linden Hills Boulevard. I wondered why I was standing there when I started remembering what had just happened, and I thanked the guy, telling him I was fine. He told me he'd be happy to drive me to the hospital or home, but I made up some story about how I had a health issue and told him again I was fine. After all, maybe he was a good Samaritan, or maybe he would have turned out to be a scarier monster than the Dogman I had just somehow gotten away from. My theory is that I just went into a state of shock and didn't remember the end part of my escape. I figured that once I walked out of the trees onto the lawn, the Dogman must have stayed in those trees and ceased his pursuit. Of course, I don't really know for sure, since I seem to have blacked out during that time. I was sneezing before I got home, and I'm still getting over a cold brought on by exposure to the weather on that day, but it could have been so much worse. I might not have escaped at all. But the main mystery that bothers me the most is how such a creature could have even been in that park in the first place. Berry Park is really just a bunch of trees with a path through the center of it. Although it can feel like you're really out in a deep forest sometimes for a little while, especially if you go off the pathway and into the trees. It's really not very large, and it's mostly surrounded by blocks of houses with people living in them. It is located near to the bird sanctuary, as I had mentioned, and that is 33 acres. But still, is that a large enough area for a land predator of that size to survive in? I wouldn't think so, but then again, I wouldn't really know. Even to travel from the sanctuary to Berry Park would have required it walking along in places where it would be easily seen by people. So possibly the Dogman has no trouble walking through suburbia in order to go from one forested area to another. What is there in Berry Park for the creature to eat anyway? In spite of the name, I don't think any berries grow there. From what I can remember, it was named after William Berry, same as the playground a bit to the southeast. If not him, then someone else from his family. At any rate, Berry Park might have some birds and squirrels for the Dogman to eat, but not a whole lot else. It just doesn't make sense for him to have been there if we assume he was, as he seemed to be, a large, incredibly smelly, mammalian land predator. But what if that wasn't what he was? What if he was maybe some kind of tulpa or thought form that had taken on a life of its own? To me, that's even scarier than it being a living animal, because it would be just as deadly and dangerous, but impossible to either capture or defend against. With a bear or a mountain lion, at least you would have a chance to defend yourself if you've taken precautions and prepared ahead of time. If Dogman is a manifestation of your own fear taking solid form in front of you, then it's got all the threat of any land predator, and it couples that with abilities no living creature could hope to emulate. I don't think I have a disciplined enough mind to create a tulpa on my own, and I don't think I have an imaginative enough one either. I can't imagine how my imagination could have dreamed up that noxious odor that the creature emitted, for one thing. But I do think that the park itself, coupled with me, working together, could possibly have created a strong enough mood that day for that Dogman to have hardened into what seemed like a very real form for long enough that I was thoroughly convinced I was about to be eaten alive. I was feeling sorry for myself about it and telling the story to a close friend. I told her it was the scariest and most traumatic thing that ever happened to me. She normally is very supportive and validates my experiences, but this time she corrected me instead. She told me it was the scariest and most traumatic thing that never happened to me. At first I felt insulted and hurt, but then I realized she was right. Nothing had really happened to me at all. I hadn't been hurt. I hadn't even been touched by the thing. My experience made me think of the episode of your show that I had written off so easily. Maybe what I saw was the return of that creature, or maybe the son of that one, because this one was kind of small. I witnessed the return of an already reported cryptid. I think I've learned a great deal because of this. Most of all, that it's better to be humble when out in the forest. I hope this experience has made me grow up a little, and that it's made me a bit more open-minded, accepting, and possibly mature. I also hope I'm more prepared the next time the Minneapolis monster returns. To tell you the truth, I haven't been here lately because I've been disgusted with the people running the world. I've been trying to think of ways to say it that might not get me banned, but even what I said already might be too much. Anyway, my basic message is twofold, and I found these two public art pieces that express it well. Turn off the corporate media and love your neighbor. Unless you live next door to a politician, that is. Today's executive producers are the guys at my local 7-Eleven who wrote this heart-wrenching note and left it outside their boarded-up store, wrecked by rioters that the mayor has announced he will not press charges against. If you can read it, it says, "Whoever did this took away 2 jobs from black men that have been working here through the crisis to support their family. Now they have no job. Black Lives Matter." Okay? Now I'm going to tell you a Dogman story, but I don't think it could possibly be as frightening as looking out the window is these days. We'll do our best, I suppose. Actually, we've got 2 Dogman stories, both from the 1980s. Let's escape from New York and escape the 21st century and go back to a simpler place in time. A time when parents brought their kids to the drive-in and got more than their money's worth when Dogman stole the show at the drive-in. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I saw your episode about Dogman and drive-ins. I've got another one you can add to your list. It happened decades ago, though. I hope that's all right. The time was the early 1980s. The place, Independence, Missouri. The B&B Twin Drive-In, specifically located just off Kentucky Road near Route 291. Independence is probably best known as the childhood home of U.S. President Harry S. Truman. His old house is only an 8-minute drive from the theater according to Google Maps. This story doesn't have anything to do with Truman, but my sister and I used to call the Dogman we saw Harry S. Truman for what it's worth. We, I think, always expected to see it again, but we never did. I'm way ahead of myself, though. I haven't even described the sighting itself. So the drive-in is situated inside a bunch of trees, which block off most views of the screens for people on the outside who didn't pay to get in. It also creates a real atmosphere at night, especially if they're showing a horror movie. The campers are getting killed off in the woods one by one, and you're having trouble keeping your eyes on the screen because you keep eyeing those woods to make sure the killer isn't coming after you next. There was one night, though, when something really did come out of those trees, and both my sister and I saw it. Everyone saw it, although I know a few these days that will deny it ever happened. It's just such a crazy story. A lot of folks would rather sweep it under the rug, but I remember it in great detail, and it was an evening I will have a hard time ever forgetting. My sister and I were both kids at the time, and our parents decided to take us to the drive-in one night. I don't remember the details why. Maybe it was a school night, but we were made to wear our pajamas so that when we fell asleep on the way home, my parents could get us into bed more quickly. I felt embarrassed and insulted by the entire thing. I don't remember my age, but I remember feeling at the time that I was too old to be going out in public wearing my pajamas. My mother rolled her eyes and said I wouldn't be out in public, I would be in the back seat of the car. I asked her what if my friends were there at the drive-in too. She rolled her eyes again and said the chances we'd run into my friends were very tiny, and if they were there, they'd probably be in their pajamas in the back seats of their parents' cars as well. All my objections overruled, we got in the car, hoping the neighbors wouldn't see us out in our pajamas, and off we went to the drive-in. I remember on the way there sort of accepting the situation. At least we had a big, comfortable back seat. It was kind of nice being driven to a place where I could watch a movie, then be driven home. What was I complaining about? As my dad paid to get in, I felt my excitement level rising. I just had to sit there and be entertained. Once my dad and mom finished arguing over where we were parked, I heard a tapping on the car window. It was one of my friends from school. As I stared on in horror, he pointed and laughed at my pajamas. It was excruciating. I just sat there humiliated as I watched him run away. At least it was over with, I thought. But no, he was just running away to get more boys from school to come back and laugh at me more. I no longer felt as though this were such a great evening of entertainment. I wished I had jeans and sneakers on so I could go hang with my classmates. My mother told me I should go out and talk to them anyway, but the flap on those pajamas was loose and I couldn't risk it coming open in public. I just kept my window shut until they walked away, and those kids bothered me straight up through high school about how I like to go to the movies in my pajamas. Thanks, Mom, for years of torment that ensued after this evening of fun. My mom had brought those small, tiny potato chip bags with her and only brought 4 bags. We each had one, with my father complaining that we were too loud eating them and he couldn't hear the movie. During intermission, we kids bugged both parents that we wanted popcorn and soda or chocolates from the concession stand. After a while, my mother joined the chorus and the 3 of us whined to my father that we wanted snacks. He kept ignoring us and ignoring us, until finally he made a disgusted sound and opened the car door quickly. Rising angrily and leaving the vehicle, he slammed the car door hard behind him. Once we felt he was out of hearing range, we cheered. Popcorn was on its way. It was around then that we noticed something strange was going on. I don't know how to describe it other than that. People were screaming off to our left. I pressed my face against the car glass, trying to figure out what was happening. My mother suddenly began screaming incoherently, and my sister gasped, saying the word "Wolfman," before beginning to scream just like my mother. I looked at where they were looking, and I saw the most incredible thing I expect I ever will see. Now, my family and I are a skeptical bunch. We can be shocked or startled, but it's hard to frighten us. Although we are big fans of almost all kinds of horror movies, we don't believe in monsters, not even Bigfoot. We don't disbelieve in Bigfoot, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we need a lot of proof to believe in anything. My family, we hear about a monster or cryptid sighting and we all try to figure out how the trick was done that made the person think he was seeing this or that. Even as kids, we didn't believe in werewolves. So for my sister to think she was seeing what she called a wolfman, and for her and my mother to both scream like that, you have to trust me that this was not a man in a monster costume. First of all, it was just too large to be a man. I don't mean it was tall, I mean it was massive and muscular and evenly proportioned all over. It was not a guy standing on stilts wearing a dog costume. They did have special effects back then where they could have created this monster on screen, but it would have taken a team of guys to pull it off. The way the face moved would have required hydraulic puppetry. It didn't just have jaws that snapped open and shut. I saw the lips curl back. I saw the eyelids not just open and close, but change expression in real time. Its eyes flashed as people were turning their engines on and trying to drive out of the place. The show wasn't over, but with that big old dog man there, it might as well have been for most folks. The creature looked like a man, but a hairy one with a dog head. The fur seemed very dark reddish brown and fairly even all over. The head was like a wolf head, although I never saw that kind of coloring on a wolf before. The body was so humanoid that really I think the fur was the only canine thing about it besides the head. I don't remember the legs at all, I'm sorry to say. If it were to happen again today, that would be the first place I would look because that's what I get asked about the most. Did it have canine legs or did it have humanoid legs? Dog feet or Bigfoot feet or what? My sister won't talk about this anymore, but I don't remember her ever discussing the feet either. We may not have actually seen them at all since we never left the vehicle when the monster was there. We just stared from inside the back seat through the windows. I remember the dogman chasing people trying to return to their cars from the concession stand and pandemonium erupting outside. Everyone was running everywhere and car horns were beeping as people jammed the exit, all trying to leave at once. In the middle of all of this, I saw the dogman take a look around, get this expression on his face like, "This is BS, man." And then I saw him tear out of there, leaping over and around cars and people to make his way back to the woods that he had come out of in like 3 seconds flat. I think he left in the direction of the golf course. Maybe he was a rich werewolf returning home after scaring the local peasants, I don't know. I seemed to be the only one who even saw him depart, as people continued to freak out for another few minutes before things started settling down. My father came back to the car empty-handed. He had missed everything. He had no idea what we were talking about, that there was a werewolf. We asked him where the snacks were, and he told us he had just gone to the men's room to pee and to get away from all our nagging. That was why he hadn't heard any of the chaos going on outside. The second feature was starting, and now I was hungry, so I remember being cranky. We got driven home before the second feature was finished, and we got punished for it when we got home. We most definitely did not fall asleep on the way back, and the neighbors pointed at us and laughed as we were led into the house crying from starvation and exhaustion, wearing our pajamas, with my father shouting humiliating things at us the whole way. Oh, the people on that block got a show on that night, and they roared with laughter. That's basically what kids were for back then, to belittle in order to make yourself feel important. One time, they videotaped spanking us over the bathtub and showed it when company came over. Everyone loved it, laughing at how hard we cried in the video. Nobody had the slightest objection at all to what would now be a good enough excuse to remove us from the home. Ah, memories. What a simpler time. So, as I mentioned earlier, there have never been any other werewolf or dogman sightings anywhere near the birthplace of Harry Truman since then, at least not as far as I know. Where the dogman came from and where he went to, I still don't know. The films that night were not Wolfman movies, so it was not a promotional stunt. It was a real creature of some sort that somehow was right there at the drive-in in Missouri. Did it drop in from outer space? Did it pop up from some underground cavern system? Did it walk in from another reality? Or did it just migrate down from Michigan or Wisconsin? What exactly did my sister and I see from the back seat that night that Dogman sold a show at the drive-in? 1980s Dogman encounter. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I had a weird and brief Dogman encounter many years ago. At least that's how I describe it now. For years I didn't speak of it at all because I felt people would call me crazy if I told them the truth. There were also a few people who I told altered versions of it to. People who believed in Bigfoot. I told them that's what I saw, but that something was wrong with its face because it looked like the face of some kind of a malformed wolf or a dog. They all told me that what I saw was real when I called it a Bigfoot. In the later 90s, when I started reading modern accounts of Dogman, I told them that was what I saw. At that point, they told me that what I saw was not real because, at least back then, Bigfoot believers did not believe in Dogman. It dawned on me through this experience that everyone had already made up their mind about what I saw before I even told them anything. People either believe in monsters or they don't, and even then, they only believe in some monsters and not other ones. If they can't fit what you're talking about into one of the hole shapes on their pegboard, then they say you're crazy, instead of admitting that their worldview is limited. This was in Wisconsin that I saw what I saw, and people have been claiming to see Dogman and variations on that theme here for a very long time. I won't bore you with the history since I imagine you probably already heard it from someone else or researched it yourself. But there have been things that look like Dogman here since before Europeans arrived in the area, unless you think the Norse Vikings arrived here in earlier times, which I suppose is possible. I don't know if shape-shifting native shamans are responsible for creating the legends of the Dogman, or if a real Dogman species out there is responsible for creating the legends of the skinwalker transforming sorcerers. Maybe they're all the same thing, or maybe they're all different phenomena that mimic each other. I'm not the person to answer that question for you. All I know is that the creature continues to be seen, no matter that it may not be being understood. Where I grew up was near Middle Village, Wisconsin, where my friend lived. It's right near the Menominee Reservation and a lot of protected land, so you can sometimes see animals over there that you may never see in other parts of Wisconsin. When I would visit my friend we can call Bobby, I would keep my eyes peeled. I saw a number of kinds of birds I was never able to identify in any book when I was there. I loved the idea that I might be able to see something that had never been cataloged when I would go there, or really almost any place in the northern wilder part of Wisconsin. The most extreme example of that, of course, is the one I'm about to tell you of. Bobby and I were walking along the dirt paths that lead into the woods north of town, just spending a warm summer Sunday together in nature, like millions of other kids all across the surface of the planet. As we were about 75 or 80 feet away from entering the woods, this big guy came on out, looking really threatening toward us. We both stopped and looked up at him, and I'll be damned, but that was a big, hairy, naked guy standing there with a dog head up on top of his shoulders. And he was furious. He was shaking all over, and he was growling, and he was showing us that he had very large teeth. He was grinding those teeth and shaking his head from side to side violently, spittle flying all around in all directions. He was showing us what he was going to do to us. When I say he had a dog head, I mean it was a wolf-like head, I suppose. It had triangular-shaped ears up on top, not floppy ears. It was a canine is the point I'm trying to make. It stood up like a man, but it was a canine. I wanted to run, but Bobby grabbed my arm and held me in place, hard. He pointed past the monster growling at us and whispered, "He's protecting his family. He's protecting his kill." I looked beyond, into the darkened cover of the forest, and I saw two other very large dogs of the same coloring as this one, eating something, which fortunately for me, was out of my view. The two of them were on all fours. I realized that if I saw them normally, I would make note that they were very large, but I would not think they were anything but stray dogs. I assumed they also could stand like this one was. I wonder even now if I had seen them before, or if I've seen them since, and just not realized I was seeing Dogman. I backed off slowly when Bobby indicated I should, and I stopped moving when he stopped. I kept my eyes down, not wanting to challenge the Dogman any further, and just trusted Bobby to get us out of there. He was the one with more experience in nature. I hoped he knew what he was doing. To this day, I have nightmares about that Dogman and his family. I don't want to think about what they were eating, and I'm glad that he came out to warn us off. If we had gotten any closer, it might have been our final curtain. But things worked out, and all we got was a major scare and a lesson to be more careful stumbling about in the wild. I don't think that what we saw was a skinwalker, because it was a family of them. I think that what we saw was proof that there is, or at least was back then, a breeding population of a type of large canine that occasionally is able to stand up and move around on its hind legs like a human, or at least like a bear. I saw it with my own eyes, and so I think they're real animals. And that's all I can remember about my 1980s Dogman encounter. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.